The storm had taken everything: the small cabin, the meager livestock, and nearly her will to continue. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of Redemption Creek, Wyoming territory, clutching the gold wedding band that represented her last 3 years of marriage to a man she'd barely known before cholera claimed him. The general store loomed before her, and inside, she knew Mr. Hartley would give her maybe 2 days' worth of flour and salt pork for the ring. 2 days to figure out how a 24-year-old widow with no family and no prospects would survive the approaching winter of 1876. Her stomach cramped with hunger as she pushed open the door, the bell chiming her desperation for all to hear. 3 cowboys stood at the counter, their conversation dying as they turned to assess her. She recognized the look. A woman alone was either pitied or preyed upon, and she'd experienced enough of both. Before we continue with Sarah's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and give this video a like. Your support truly motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. "I need supplies," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. She placed the ring on the scarred wooden counter. "This is all I have." Mr. Hartley picked up the band, squinting at it in the lamplight. "Might get you through a week if you're careful, Mrs. Mitchell, but winter's coming hard this year." A week is enough time to find work. The lie tasted bitter. Every ranch within riding distance had turned her away. Women didn't punch cattle or mend fences, and the only other work available, she'd rather starve. "Ma'am," the voice came from behind her, deep and rough as gravel. "Put your ring away." Sarah turned to find the tallest of the 3 cowboys stepping forward. He was perhaps 30, with shoulders that seemed to fill the narrow aisle between the pickle barrels and the flour sacks. Dark hair touched his collar beneath a battered hat, and eyes the color of winter pine assessed her with an intensity that made her want to step back, except there was nowhere to go. "Excuse me?" she managed. "That ring means something to you. Gold isn't what you need here." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather fold, counting out bills onto the counter. "Mr. Hartley, load up whatever Mrs. Mitchell needs and add it to my account at the ranch." "Now, Caleb, you can't just," the shopkeeper started. "I can, and I am." Caleb Tucker's jaw set in a way that suggested argument was futile. "Mrs. Mitchell, my ranch is the Circle T, about 8 miles north. I'm short a cook, since my last one quit to get married. The bunkhouse boys are about to mutiny if they have to eat my attempts at biscuits for another week." Sarah's pride warred with her hunger. "I don't accept charity." "Good, because I'm offering employment, 3 meals a day, private room in the main house, and $30 a month." "You can cook." "Yes, but then we have an arrangement." He tipped his hat, and something in his eyes, respect maybe, or understanding, made her throat tight. "I'll send a wagon for you tomorrow morning. Bring whatever you have." He was gone before she could protest further, his 2 companions following with knowing grins. Mr. Hartley chuckled, shaking his head. "That Caleb Tucker. Lost his wife 2 years back. Swore he'd never let another woman near his heart. But he can't seem to stop himself from helping folks in need." That night, Sarah lay in the tiny room she'd been renting above the saloon, listening to the raucous sounds below, and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake accepting help from a stranger. But when dawn broke cold and gray, and the wagon arrived with a young cowboy named Pete driving, she climbed aboard with her single carpet bag and didn't look back. The Circle T spread across a valley like a promise, The ranch house was solid timber and stone, built to withstand Wyoming's fury. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a dozen horses grazed in the near pasture. Pete helped her down and pointed to the front door. "Boss said to get you settled in the kitchen. It's through the main room. He's out checking the north fence line, but should be back by supper." The house was cleaner than she'd expected for a household of men. No dust coated the furniture, and the floors showed signs of recent sweeping. But the kitchen revealed the truth of Caleb's claim. A blackened pot sat in the sink, and the remains of what might have once been bacon were welded to a cast-iron skillet. Sarah tied on an apron she found hanging by the door and got to work. By the time the sun reached its zenith, she'd scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed, inventoried the larder, well-stocked, she noted with approval, and had 2 loaves of bread rising near the stove. The physical labor felt good, purposeful. For the first time in months, the tight knot of anxiety in her chest loosened slightly. She was rolling out biscuit dough when the door opened and Caleb Tucker filled the frame, his hat in his hands. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, carved by sun and sorrow. A scar traced his left cheekbone, and his hands, as he set his hat on the table, bore the calluses of hard work. "Smells better already," he said, his voice gruff. "You settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you." The kitchen was challenging. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "The men said you'd probably quit after seeing the state of things. I told them you look tougher than that." "I am." The words came out sharper than intended, defensive. "I've survived worse than dirty pans." His expression shifted, something dark and understanding passing across his features. "I expect you have. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. It locks from the inside. The men bunk in the separate building out back, and they know better than to cause trouble. But if anyone makes you uncomfortable, you tell me. Why are you being so kind to me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Caleb was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Because 2 years ago, my Emily was sick and scared, and strangers showed her kindness when I couldn't be there every moment. Figured I owe the world a debt." He cleared his throat, the moment of vulnerability closing. "Supper at 6. The men will expect a lot after weeks of my cooking, so don't feel you need to prove anything first night." But Sarah did need to prove something, to herself, if no one else. By 6 o'clock, the table groaned with fried chicken, mashed potatoes swimming in gravy, fresh biscuits, green beans seasoned with bacon, and 2 apple pies cooling on the sideboard. When the 7 ranch hands filed in, their expressions ranged from skeptical to hopeful. Pete was the youngest at 19, eager and kind. Old Joe had worked the ranch for 30 years and appointed himself her unofficial guardian. Miguel spoke with a soft accent and gentle humor. The others introduced themselves in a blur of names she'd sort out later. But it was Caleb who watched her with those careful, assessing eyes as the men devoured everything she'd prepared with enthusiastic praise. "Ma'am, if you cook like this every day, I might propose marriage myself," Pete said around a mouthful of pie, then colored scarlet when old Joe cuffed him upside the head. "Boy's got no manners, Mrs. Mitchell," Joe apologized. "But the sentiment stands. This is the best meal we've had in 2 years. Sarah felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen heat. Purpose. She'd forgotten how it felt to be needed for something beyond her ability to endure suffering. The days fell into a rhythm. She rose before dawn to start breakfast, packed lunches for the men working distant sections of the ranch, prepared dinner, and then planned the next day's meals. In between, she cleaned, mended, and slowly made the house feel less like a monument to grief and more like a home. Caleb was unfailingly polite but distant. He ate meals with the men, complimented her cooking with the same gruff economy of words he used for everything, and spent his evenings doing bookwork in his study. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not predatory like some men, but searching, as if trying to solve a puzzle. 3 weeks into her employment, the first real snow fell. Sarah woke to find the world transformed into white silence. She was kneading bread when Caleb came in from the barn, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. "Storm's going to get worse," he said, stomping his boots clean. "The men are securing the stock. We'll all stay close to the buildings today." He hesitated, then added, "You should know, we might be snowed in for a few days. If that makes you uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable." She shaped the dough with practiced hands. "I grew up in Missouri. Snow doesn't frighten me." "No," he said quietly. "I don't imagine much frightens you anymore." The observation was too accurate, too knowing. Sarah felt her defenses rise. "You don't know anything about me. I know you flinch when someone moves too fast near you. I know you've got bruises on your arms that are only now fading to yellow." Her hands stilled in the dough. Your husband was a fool and a coward." The sudden steel in Caleb's voice made her look up. "Any man who raises his hand to a woman deserves a bullet, not a wife. He's dead." The words tasted like ash. "Cholera took him before you could what? Escape? Fight back?" "Caleb, because Emily was like you once. Her first husband beat her bloody before he died in a logging accident. When I met her, she was working as a seamstress, terrified of her own shadow. It took me 2 years to convince her I wouldn't hurt her. 2 years of patience and proving myself every damn day." His voice cracked. "She gave me 5 good years before the fever took her. I'd give anything for 5 more minutes." "I'm sorry." The inadequate words were all she had. "Don't be sorry. Just let yourself heal here, however long that takes." He turned away, grabbing his coat. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything." After he left, Sarah stood motionless, her hands buried in dough, while something inside her chest cracked open just a fraction. For the first time since her husband's death, perhaps for the first time in her life, she felt the possibility of safety. The storm lasted 3 days, turning the Circle T into an isolated island of warmth in a sea of white. Caleb taught her to play chess in the evenings, while wind howled around the eaves. His hands, so large and calloused, moved the pieces with surprising delicacy. Sometimes their fingers would brush during exchanges, and Sarah found herself noticing details: the scar on his knuckle from a barbed wire cut, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at her attempts at strategy, the deep timbre of his laugh when she made an unexpected move. "You're a quick learner," he said on the 3rd night, studying the board. "Most people I've taught never get past basic patterns. My father taught me to think several moves ahead. He said it was essential for survival." The memory surfaced before she could suppress it. "Of course, he also taught me that a wife's duty was obedience, so his wisdom was selective." Caleb moved his knight, capturing her bishop. "Your father arranged your marriage?" "Sold it, more accurately. Thomas Mitchell offered a good price for a young wife to work his homestead. My father saw an opportunity to reduce household expenses." She kept her voice level, clinical. "I learned quickly that Thomas's definition of work was broad and his temper was short." "How did you survive it?" The question, asked so simply, nearly undid her. I don't know. Some days, I'm not sure I did survive. I think part of me died in that cabin, and I'm just carrying the rest around, waiting to figure out what comes next. Caleb reached across the board and covered her hand with his. The gesture was brief, respectful, but the warmth of his palm seared through her. What comes next is living, Sarah, really living, not just surviving. You get to decide what that looks like. That night, she dreamed of hands that held gently instead of hurt, of a voice speaking her name with reverence instead of contempt. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a longing in her heart she'd thought Thomas had beaten out of her forever. When the snow finally cleared enough for work to resume, Sarah found herself oddly disappointed. The forced intimacy of the storm had revealed signs of Caleb she hadn't expected. A dry humor, a love of books, a tendency to hum while doing evening chores. She missed the chess games, the long conversations by firelight, the way he'd looked at her as if she were something precious he was afraid to touch. But ranch work waited for no one. Caleb and the hands spent long days repairing damage from the storm, checking on cattle scattered across the range, and restocking supplies for the next blow. Sarah fell back into her routine, though now she found herself listening for Caleb's step, watching for him through the kitchen window, saving the choicest portions of meals for his plate. Old Joe noticed. "Boss is a good man," he said one afternoon, finding her staring out at the barn where Caleb was shoeing a horse. "But he's been carrying a load of grief that'd break most men. Emily's loss near killed him. He blames himself for not being able to save her. That's foolish. No one can stop a fever. Love makes fools of us all, Mrs. Mitchell." He sat by her bedside for 3 weeks, trying every remedy, praying to every god. When she finally passed, part of him went with her. Joe studied her with knowing eyes. "But lately, I've seen glimpses of the man he used to be. You've been good for this place. Good for him. I'm just the cook, if that's what you need to tell yourself." Joe patted her shoulder. "But a blind man could see the way he looks at you, and the way you look back." Sarah wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat, because Joe was right. Somewhere between the first meal and the chess games, between Caleb's quiet respect and his understanding of her scars, she'd started feeling things she'd sworn never to feel again. Want, trust, hope. It terrified her. The moment of reckoning came on a bright April morning when 3 riders appeared on the eastern road. Sarah was hanging laundry when she saw them, and her blood turned to ice. She knew that profile, that riding style. Her father had come for her. She was in the house, with the door locked before conscious thought caught up with panic. Through the window, she watched the men approach the barn where Caleb was working. Watched her father dismount with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. Watched Thomas's brother, Samuel, and her own older brother, James, flank him like enforcers. Caleb met them outside, his posture deceptively relaxed. But Sarah had learned to read him, and she saw the tension in his shoulders, the slight shift of weight that put him closer to the rifle leaning against the barn wall. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw her father gesture toward the house, saw Caleb's head shake in firm negation, saw Samuel step forward aggressively, only to stop when Caleb's hand moved to his hip. The confrontation lasted maybe 5 minutes before her father remounted, his face mottled with rage. The 3 riders departed the way they'd come, and Caleb stood watching, until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned toward the house, and even from this distance, Sarah could see the set of his jaw. She met him at the door, her whole body shaking. What did they want? You. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. Your father claims you belong with family, that your late husband's brother has a right to inherit you. The distaste in his voice was palpable. I told them you're under my protection and employment, and they have no authority here. They won't accept that. My father thinks women are property to be distributed among men. And Samuel? She wrapped her arms around herself. Thomas told him I was part of the land claim, that when he died, I'd be passed to his brother like livestock. Over my dead body, the words were flat, final. Sarah, I need to know, do you want to go with them? Because if you do, if there's any part of you that feels obligated. No, the word burst from her with the force of years of suppressed rebellion. I'd rather die than go back to that life. But Caleb, my father won't stop. He'll bring the law, claim I'm needed for debts or family obligation. He knows people, has connections. So do I. Caleb stepped closer, and Sarah found herself backing against the door. But there was no threat in his proximity, only solid certainty. I've got friends in the territorial government and the U.S. Marshal Service. Your father's homestead claim is based on your marriage to Thomas, which ended with his death. Samuel has no legal claim to you, and your father's parental authority ended when you married. Legally, you're a free woman. Legal doesn't always matter out here. No, he agreed, which is why I'm going to make this very simple for them. You're under my protection, Sarah. That means anyone who wants to take you has to go through me first. And I haven't met a man yet brave or foolish enough to try. The fierce possessiveness in his voice did something to her insides. Why? Why would you risk yourself for me? Because, he stopped, jaw working as if wrestling with words too large to speak. Because somewhere between burnt biscuits and chess games, I started caring about you, not as a cook or an employee, but as Sarah, the woman who hums while making bread, who reads poetry she thinks no one knows about, who survived hell and still finds ways to be kind. He took a breath. I know it's too soon. I know you need time and space, and probably a man less broken than I am. But I need you to know, you matter to me. Your safety, your happiness, your freedom, they matter. Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. I'm scared, she whispered. Scared of them, scared of feeling this way about you. Scared that if I let myself want something good, it'll be taken away. I'm scared too. Caleb lifted his hand, hovering near her face until she nodded permission. Then his palm cupped her cheek with devastating gentleness. I'm terrified of losing someone again, of failing to protect what matters, but I'm more scared of living the rest of my life in the safety of numbness and missing the chance to feel alive again. What if they come back with more men? What if... Then we'll handle it. Together. The word resonated with promise. You're not alone anymore, Sarah. Not unless you choose to be. She leaned into his touch, feeling the warmth of his hand against her cold skin. I choose together, she breathed. I choose you. The kiss was inevitable, gentle as first snowfall. Caleb's lips brushed hers with a reverence that made her heart ache. One hand cradled her face, while the other settled carefully on her waist, never gripping, always offering the freedom to pull away. But Sarah pressed closer instead, her hands finding his chest, feeling the steady thunder of his heartbeat beneath her palms. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We'll do this at your pace," he murmured. "No rushing, no pressure. You tell me what you need, and I'll move heaven and earth to give it to you. Right now, I need to know you're real, that this isn't some dream I'll wake from." He took her hand and placed it over his heart. "Real as the ground beneath your feet, real as the sky above, real as this feeling that's been growing in my chest every time you smile." They stood that way for a long moment, learning the shape of this new thing between them. When Sarah finally stepped back, she felt steadier than she had in years. "What do we do about my father?" "We prepare, and we wait." The waiting lasted a week. Sarah went about her duties with a knife strapped to her thigh beneath her skirts and a loaded pistol in the kitchen drawer. Caleb taught her to shoot during afternoon breaks, his hands guiding hers as she learned to aim and fire. The first time she hit the target, his whoop of pride made her laugh despite her fear. "You're a natural," he said, standing close behind her as she reloaded. "Steady hands, good eye. Thomas never let me near guns, said women weren't capable of handling weapons." Thomas was an idiot. Caleb's breath stirred her hair. "Women I've known could outshoot most men given the chance. My Emily could drop a charging bear at 30 yards. Sarah turned in the circle of his arms. "Tell me about her. Really tell me." He was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. She was strong and stubborn and had a laugh that sounded like music. She loved wildflowers and terrible jokes and the first snow of winter. She taught me that surviving isn't the same as living, and that loving someone fully means accepting the risk of losing them. His thumb traced Sarah's cheekbone. "She made me promise, near the end, that I wouldn't bury my heart with her, that I'd find a way to be happy again. I thought it was impossible. Now I think she knew something I didn't, that the heart has more capacity than we imagine, that loving again doesn't diminish what came before, it honors it." He kissed her forehead. "She would have liked you, would have appreciated your strength. I'm not strong. I'm terrified most of the time. Strength isn't the absence of fear, Sarah. It's being afraid and choosing courage anyway. You've been doing that every day since you walked into Hartley's store." Parade came on a moonless night in late April. Sarah woke to the sound of breaking glass and Caleb's shout from downstairs. She grabbed the pistol from her nightstand and eased her door open, heart pounding so hard she could barely hear. 5 men had forced their way inside. Her father and Samuel were among them, along with 3 hired guns she didn't recognize. Caleb stood at the base of the stairs, in his undershirt and pants, rifle trained on the intruders. "Get out of my house," he said with lethal calm. "We're taking what's ours," her father declared. "Sarah, get down here. You're coming home where you belong." She belongs nowhere but where she chooses. Caleb didn't flinch as Samuel drew his revolver. "And she's made her choice clear. Now you have 10 seconds to leave before I start shooting. You're 1 man against 5. Samuel grinned, mean and ugly. "Those aren't good odds. 6 against 5, actually." Sarah descended the stairs, her own pistol raised, with surprisingly steady hands. She positioned herself beside Caleb, feeling his quick glance of approval. "I'm not going anywhere with you. Not now, not ever." "You ungrateful," her father started. "She gave you an answer," Caleb interrupted. "Now here's mine. You step foot on Circle T land again, and I'll have you arrested for trespassing and attempted kidnapping. I've already filed a deposition with the territorial marshal explaining the situation. Any harm that comes to Sarah Mitchell or myself will be investigated with full federal authority." One of the hired guns shifted nervously. "You didn't say nothing about federal marshals," he muttered to Sarah's father. "He's bluffing," Samuel snarled, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Try me." Caleb's finger rested on the trigger. "I've killed men for lesser offenses. You think I won't defend my home and the woman I love?" The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Sarah felt their weight, their truth, settle into her bones. Her father's face purpled with rage. "You can't." "I can, and I have." Caleb's voice dropped to a whisper, more terrifying than any shout. "Last chance. Leave, or I start with you." The hired guns were already backing toward the door. Samuel hesitated, looking to Sarah's father for direction. But even he seemed to recognize he'd lost this battle. "This isn't over." He spat. "Yes," Caleb said quietly, "it is." They left in a flurry of curses and threats, but Sarah knew from the slump of her father's shoulders, it truly was finished. Men like him understood dominance and force, and Caleb had just demonstrated he couldn't be bested on either count. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Sarah's legs gave out. Caleb caught her before she hit the floor, sweeping her into his arms and carrying her to the couch. She was shaking so hard, her teeth chattered. "It's over," he murmured, holding her close. "You're safe. I've got you." "You said," her voice broke, "you said you loved me." His hand stroked her hair, gentle and rhythmic. "I did. I do. Should have said it sooner, but I'm not good with words. Figured I'd show you through actions. But tonight you needed to hear it." "I know." His arms tightened around her, secure and warm. But it feels good," she finished, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. "It hurts, but it feels good. Like coming back to life after being numb for so long." Understanding flooded his expression. "Yeah," he breathed, "exactly like that." He kissed her then, not gently this time, but with the desperate relief of two people who'd faced darkness and chosen light. Sarah melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, anchoring herself to this moment, this man, this impossible second chance at living. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I'll die before I hurt you," he said fiercely. "Before I let anyone hurt you. You believe that?" "I do." And she did. For the first time in her adult life, she trusted completely. They sat together until dawn painted the sky pink and gold, talking about everything and nothing. Caleb told her about building the ranch, about Emily's death, about the dark year after when he'd considered selling everything and disappearing. Sarah told him about her childhood, her desperate attempts to please a father who valued sons over daughters, the daily humiliations of her marriage. "You deserved so much better," Caleb said, anger threading his voice. "I'm getting better now." She laced her fingers through his. "I'm getting you." That's a low bar. It's everything. As the ranch stirred to life around them, they made plans. They'd marry properly at the church in town. They'd expand the ranch, maybe add some sheep to the cattle operation. They'd build a life, measured not by what they'd survived, but by what they created together. Old Joe found them there, an hour later, still wrapped in each other's arms, and his weathered face split into a grin. "About damn time," he said. then headed for the kitchen, whistling. The wedding took place on a June morning when wildflowers carpeted the valley. Sarah wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself, with lace from Emily's wedding gown that Caleb had kept in a trunk. He wore his best suit, and a look of such fierce devotion that Sarah's breath caught. The circuit preacher kept the ceremony brief. When he reached the vows, Caleb took Sarah's hands and spoke words that had nothing to do with the traditional liturgy. "I promise to see you, really see you, every day of our lives. To honor your strength. To give you space to heal, and time to grow, and freedom to become whoever you want to be. I promise to love you, not as someone I saved, or someone who saved me, but as my equal partner in whatever comes next." Sarah's turn. "I promise to trust you with my fears and my hopes. To build a life with you that's defined by choice, not obligation. To love you, not despite our scars, but because of how we earned them and how we heal them together." "Together," Caleb echoed, and the word became their wedding bell. The kiss was sweet and full of promise. The ranch hands whooped and hollered. Old Joe cried openly, and Sarah Mitchell Tucker felt the last chains of her past life fall away, replaced by the warm weight of a gold band that meant everything the first one hadn't: partnership, respect, love. That night, in the room that was now theirs, Caleb unlaced her dress with shaking hands. "Go slow," she whispered, not from fear, but from the overwhelming intensity of feeling cherished. "It hurts, but it feels good." He understood. His lips traced the faded bruises on her arms, the scar on her shoulder, every mark of her survival. "Beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "Every part of you is beautiful." And as they came together with exquisite care, Sarah discovered that the poets were right. Love was a kind of sweet ache, a tender breaking open, a hurt that healed even as it wounded. It was choosing vulnerability after violence. It was trusting hands that had only ever held gently. It was the terrifying, glorious act of letting someone see all of you and staying anyway. The years that followed brought their share of hardship: harsh winters, lean seasons, a difficult childbirth that gave them a red-faced daughter with Caleb's eyes. But they faced everything together, just as they'd promised. The Circle T prospered. Sarah's cooking became legendary across 3 counties. And on quiet evenings, they still played chess by the fire, their hands meeting across the board in gestures too familiar to be accidental. Sometimes Sarah would wake from nightmares of her old life, and Caleb would hold her until the terror passed. Sometimes he would stare too long at Emily's portrait, and Sarah would take his hand, reminding him that loving her didn't mean forgetting. They honored their scars and built something beautiful from broken pieces. On their 10th anniversary, standing on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley gold, Caleb pulled her close. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For walking into Hartley's store with nothing but a gold ring and more courage than any soldier I've known. For choosing to stay. For choosing me." Sarah turned in his arms, seeing the lines time had etched deeper around his eyes, the silver threading his temples, the unchanging devotion in his gaze. "You chose me first," she reminded him. "Saw me when I was invisible. Gave me space to become myself." "We chose each other," he corrected. "Every day, we keep choosing. Together. Always together." And as they stood, watching the sun sink below the horizon, 2 survivors who'd found their way to healing in each other's arms. Sarah Mitchell Tucker knew with absolute certainty that she had finally come home. The letter arrived on a crisp October morning, 3 years after Sarah and Caleb's wedding. Their daughter, Emily Rose, named for the woman who taught Caleb how to love, was toddling around the kitchen while Sarah kneaded bread. The familiar rhythm of ranch life had settled into their bones. The sounds of cattle lowing in the distance, Caleb's voice directing the hands, the creak of the windmill turning in the breeze. Pete brought the letter in with the week's mail, his young face troubled. "Mrs. Tucker, this came from the territorial capital. Looks official." Sarah wiped flour from her hands and broke the seal, her heart sinking as she read. The territorial government was conducting a land survey, and several homestead claims, including Thomas Mitchell's original property, were being contested. As his widow, she was named in the dispute. Her presence was required in Cheyenne for a hearing in 2 weeks. No, the word came out flat. "I'm not going back there." Caleb found her an hour later, sitting on the porch steps with the letter crumpled in her fist and Emily Rose napping against her shoulder. He lowered himself beside her, his warmth solid and reassuring. "Pete told me." He didn't reach for the letter, just waited. "That land took everything from me. My youth, my hope, nearly my life." Sarah's voice shook. "Thomas worked me like a mule on that worthless patch of rocks and scrub. And now they want me to travel back there to testify about property I never wanted in the first place? What does the letter say, exactly?" She smoothed the paper and read aloud. The territorial surveyor had discovered that Thomas's claim overlapped with a larger ranch operation owned by a man named Garrett Hayes. Hayes was now claiming Sarah had no legal right to Thomas's land since she'd abandoned the property. If she didn't appear to defend her claim, the land and any assets associated with it would be forfeit. "Assets?" Caleb's brow furrowed. "What assets? You came here with nothing but the clothes on your back." "I don't know. Thomas never told me anything about money or property beyond the homestead." She shifted Emily Rose to her other shoulder. "But it doesn't matter. Let Hayes have it. I want nothing from that place." Sarah hand covered hers. "If there's money or property rightfully yours, we're not letting some land grabbers steal it. That's not about the past. It's about what's fair. I can't go back there. Then we go together." His tone left no room for argument. "Old Joe can manage the ranch for 2 weeks. We'll take Emily Rose, make it a family trip. Face this thing head on and be done with it forever." Sarah looked at her husband, seeing the determination in his eyes. He was right, of course. Running from the past only gave it power. "Together," she said softly. "Always." The journey to Cheyenne took 4 days by train, a luxury that still amazed Sarah. Emily Rose was delighted by everything. The rushing landscape outside the windows, the dining car, the sleeping berths. Caleb proved surprisingly adept at entertaining a restless toddler, making shadow puppets on the compartment wall and telling elaborate stories about the cattle they passed. "You're good with her," Sarah observed, watching him cradle their daughter as she finally dozed off. "She makes it easy. Got her mother's sweet nature." He smiled, but Sarah saw the tension around his eyes. He was worried, though he tried to hide it. Cheyenne was larger than Sarah remembered, bustling with progress. The territorial capitol building was an impressive stone structure that made her feel small and insignificant. But Caleb's hand on her lower back steadied her as they climbed the steps, Emily rose, secure in her father's other arm. The hearing was scheduled for the next morning, giving them an evening to prepare. They found rooms at a respectable hotel, and after putting Emily Rose to bed, Caleb spread the documents they'd brought on the small desk. "There's something odd here," he said, studying Thomas's old papers. "Your husband filed a mineral claim in addition to the homestead patent. Did you know about this?" Sarah shook her head. "He never mentioned minerals. The land was barely good enough for farming. According to this, he registered the claim 6 months before he died. There's a notation about a survey, but no results listed." Caleb tapped the paper thoughtfully. "I think we need to find out what Garrett Hayes knows that we don't." They got their answer the next morning, when Hayes himself strutted into the hearing room. He was a bull of a man, expensive suit straining over a thick middle, gold watch chain glinting. His lawyer was equally polished, carrying a leather satchel that screamed money and influence. The territorial surveyor, a thin man named Addison with nervous hands, called the hearing to order. "We're here to resolve the disputed claim on Section 14, Township 23, previously registered to Thomas Mitchell, deceased. Mrs. Sarah Tucker, as Mitchell's widow, is the current claimant. Mr. Garrett Hayes contests this claim. Mr. Hayes, please present your case." Hayes's lawyer stood, smooth as oil. "Your Honor, my client purchased the rights to Section 14 from Samuel Mitchell, brother of the deceased Thomas Mitchell, 6 months ago. As next of kin, Samuel had the authority to sell the property, which Mrs. Tucker had clearly abandoned." "That's a lie!" Sarah was on her feet before Caleb could stop her. "Samuel had no rights to that land. I'm Thomas's widow and legal heir." "Mrs. Tucker," the surveyor said gently, "please let Mr. Hayes finish." The lawyer continued. "Furthermore, my client has invested considerable resources in developing the land, based on the mineral survey showing significant silver deposits in the eastern quadrant. Mrs. Tucker made no effort to work or maintain the property, effectively abandoning her claim under territorial homestead law. Silver deposits. Sarah's mind reeled. Thomas had found silver and never told her, had died before he could profit from it, leaving her in poverty while sitting on potential wealth. Caleb stood, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made ranch hands jump. "May I speak?" The surveyor nodded. "My name is Caleb Tucker. I'm Mrs. Tucker's husband, and a rancher with property in Wyoming Territory for 15 years. I'm familiar with homestead and mineral law." He pulled papers from his coat. "I have here a copy of Mrs. Tucker's marriage certificate to Thomas Mitchell, his death certificate, and documentation showing no legal transfer of property to Samuel Mitchell or anyone else. Under territorial law, a widow retains all rights to her deceased husband's property, unless she formally relinquishes them or remarries, which she did to me 3 years after Mitchell's death. At no point did she abandon or forfeit her claim." Hayes's lawyer smirked. "She left the property within weeks of her husband's death and never returned. That constitutes abandonment." "She left because she was destitute and starving," Caleb said, his voice hardening. "Mitchell left her with no resources and no means of survival. She sought employment to avoid freezing or starving to death. That's called survival, not abandonment." "Mr. Tucker makes a valid point," the surveyor said, making notes. "However, Mr. Hayes has invested in the property based on what he believed was a legal purchase. We need to determine if Samuel Mitchell had any legitimate claim to sell." "He didn't," Sarah said firmly. "Thomas had no siblings. Samuel was his cousin, Nothing more. The room went silent. Hayes's face reddened. That's impossible. Samuel showed me documents. Forged documents, apparently, Caleb said. Samuel Mitchell was Thomas's cousin, not his brother. He had no legal standing to sell property he didn't own, which means, Mr. Hayes, you were defrauded. But that's between you and Samuel. It doesn't give you rights to my wife's property. The surveyor called for a recess while he reviewed documentation. Sarah found herself shaking, and Caleb pulled her into an empty corridor. Emily rose, still drowsing in his arms. Silver, she whispered. Thomas found silver and never told me. I was eating scraps and wearing rags while sitting on a fortune. Because he was a bastard who enjoyed having power over you. Caleb's free hand cupped her face. But it's your fortune now. You can do whatever you want with it. Sell it, develop it, or salt the earth and walk away. Your choice. I want it to mean something good, something that helps people like I was. Then that's what we'll do. The surveyor returned with his ruling after 2 hours of deliberation. Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mrs. Sarah Tucker is the legal owner of Section 14, Township 23, and all associated mineral rights. The sale to Mr. Hayes is invalid due to fraudulent representation by the seller. Mr. Hayes, you'll need to pursue damages against Samuel Mitchell through the courts. Hayes exploded from his seat. This is robbery. I've spent thousands developing that mine. That's unfortunate, the surveyor said dryly. But it doesn't change the law. Mrs. Tucker, the property is yours. What you do with it is your decision. Sarah stood, finding strength in Caleb's steady presence beside her. Mr. Hayes, I have no interest in mining or the property itself. But I'm not going to let a fraud stand. I propose this. You can continue your mining operation, but you'll pay fair market value for the mineral rights. Not to me personally, but to a fund I'm establishing to help women escaping dangerous situations. 20% of your profits will go to this fund for the next 10 years. Hayes's lawyer started to object, but Hayes himself held up a hand. He studied Sarah with new respect. You could have demanded much more. I could have, she agreed, but I'm not interested in revenge or greed. I'm interested in making sure other women don't have to suffer like I did. Do we have an agreement? Hayes extended his hand. We do, Mrs. Tucker. You drive a hard bargain. I learned from hard experience. They shook on it, and by the time they left Cheyenne 3 days later, after lawyers drew up proper contracts, Sarah had secured a steady income that would fund a women's shelter in town and provide resources for women fleeing abusive situations. The irony of Thomas's silver creating something good from so much pain wasn't lost on her. On the train home, with Emily Rose asleep between them, Caleb took her hand. I'm proud of you. I just wanted something good to come from all that suffering. You are something good that came from that suffering. Everything else is just proof of your grace. The women's shelter opened the following spring in a modest house Sarah purchased on the edge of town. She named it Emily's House, in honor of both Caleb's first wife and their daughter. Women who represented hope and new beginnings. Old Joe's widowed sister, Martha, agreed to manage it, a formidable woman with a soft heart and no tolerance for nonsense. Sarah visited monthly, bringing supplies and talking with the residents. Their stories echoed her own. Arranged marriages, violent husbands, families who treated daughters as commodities. She listened without judgment and offered what she'd learned, that survival was strength, that starting over was possible, that they deserved lives defined by choice rather than obligation. One afternoon in late summer, she returned from town to find a stranger's horse tied outside the ranch house. A quality animal, she noted, well-groomed and expensive. Inside, she found Caleb in the study with a woman perhaps 50 years old, elegantly dressed in traveling clothes. "Sarah," Caleb stood immediately. "This is Mrs. Catherine Morrison from San Francisco. She's been waiting to speak with you." The woman rose, extending her hand with a worn smile. "Mrs. Tucker, thank you for seeing me without notice. I've traveled a long way to meet you. May I ask why?" "I've heard about Emily's house and the work you're doing. I represent the Western Women's Auxiliary, an organization dedicated to improving conditions for women throughout the territories. We're impressed by your approach and would like to discuss expanding the model to other locations." Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "I'm just one person, trying to help in a small way." "Sometimes that's how movements start." Mrs. Morrison pulled papers from her satchel. "We have funding available and connections throughout California and Nevada territories. With your permission, we'd like to establish similar houses using your framework. We'd want you involved in training managers and developing standards of care. I'm a rancher's wife with a small child. I can't travel extensively. We're not asking you to abandon your life, Mrs. Tucker. Just to share your knowledge and occasionally consult. We'd compensate you, of course, and all materials would give you credit as the founder." Sarah looked at Caleb, who nodded encouragement. What exactly would this involve? Over the next 2 hours, they discussed logistics. The auxiliary wanted to open 5 houses in the first year, each modeled on Emily's house. They needed Sarah to write down her procedures, train the first managers, and be available for questions. In exchange, they'd provide generous funding and handle all administrative details. "I need to think about it," Sarah said finally. Mrs. Morrison smiled. "Of course. I'll be staying in town for a week. Send word when you're ready." After she left, Sarah walked out to the pasture where Caleb was teaching Emily Rose to feed apples to the horses. Her daughter's delighted giggle made her heart squeeze. "You should do it," Caleb said without preamble. "How did you know I was worried about that?" "Because I know you." He lifted Emily Rose onto his shoulders. "You're thinking you don't deserve this attention, that you're not qualified or important enough. I'm nobody special. You're wrong." He turned to face her fully. "You're a survivor who's choosing to help others survive. You're a woman who took her worst experience and transformed it into hope. That's not nothing, Sarah. That's extraordinary." "What if I fail? What if I can't help them the way they need?" "Then you'll have tried, which is more than most people do, and you won't be doing it alone." He took her hand. "We're partners, remember? Emily's house works because we both support it. This expansion will work the same way." Sarah watched her daughter pat the horse's nose fearlessly and saw the future stretching ahead. A future where other women might have the chances she'd fought so hard to claim. "All right," she said. "Let's do it." The next 3 years transformed Sarah's life in ways she'd never imagined. Emily's house multiplied across 5 territories, each one providing shelter, job training, and legal assistance to women in crisis. Sarah wrote a manual, with Caleb's help editing late into many nights, that became the standard for women's shelters throughout the West. She traveled occasionally, always with Caleb and Emily Rose, training managers and speaking at women's auxiliaries. The work wasn't without cost. Some towns objected to the shelters, claiming they encouraged women to abandon their families. Men who'd beaten their wives showed up making threats. Once, a husband tried to burn down the original Emily's house, but Martha drove him off with a shotgun and old Joe's help. Through it all, Caleb remained her anchor. He managed the ranch, cared for Emily Rose during Sarah's trips, and provided quiet support when the work became overwhelming. On difficult days, he'd find her staring out at the valley and pull her close. "You're doing good work," he'd murmur. "Real, important work. Don't let the bastards make you doubt that." "I'm tired," she'd admit. "Tired of fighting the same battles over and over." "Then rest. Take a break. The work will be there when you're ready, but you don't have to carry it all alone." One evening, after putting Emily Rose to bed, Sarah found Caleb on the porch with a glass of whiskey and a thoughtful expression. She settled beside him, accepting the glass when he offered it. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about adding to our family." Sarah's heart jumped. "Another child?" "If you want, but I was thinking bigger." He turned to face her. "What if we opened our home to some of the women from Emily's house? The ones who need longer-term support, who aren't ready to be on their own yet. We've got the space, the resources. We could teach them ranching, give them real skills and time to heal." Sarah stared at him, love swelling so large in her chest it almost hurt. "You'd do that? Fill our home with strangers?" They wouldn't be strangers for long, and Emily Rose would learn what it means to help others, to be part of something bigger than ourselves. He took her hand. "We both know what isolation and desperation feel like. Why not share what we have?" "Because you're a remarkable man, Caleb Tucker." "No, I'm just a man who loves a remarkable woman and wants to support her dreams." They started small, bringing 2 women to the ranch that fall. Clara was 19, fleeing a father who'd sold her to a miner 3 times her age. Ruth was 35, with 2 small children, escaping a husband who'd broken her arm twice. Both were wary, broken, afraid. Sarah taught them to cook, to sew, to manage household accounts. Caleb taught them to ride, to handle livestock, to defend themselves. Emily Rose, now 5 and fearless, became their unexpected champion, chattering constantly and pulling them into games that made them forget to be afraid. Slowly, the women healed. Clara discovered a talent for working with horses and eventually became the Circle T's head wrangler. Ruth's children thrived in the open space, and she proved brilliant with numbers, taking over the ranch's bookkeeping. They stayed 2 years before moving on. Clara to manage a stable in Denver. Ruth to open a boarding house in Cheyenne, where she provided safe housing for working women. Others came after them. Some stayed months, others years. The Circle T became known throughout the territory as a place of second chances. Sarah and Caleb never charged the women anything, instead offering work, training, and time to recover. The silver mine profits funded it all, along with the ranch's growing prosperity. On their 15th anniversary, Sarah and Caleb stood on the porch, watching Emily Rose, now 12 and already showing signs of her mother's determination, teach a new arrival how to saddle a horse. 2 more women were in the kitchen preparing dinner, their laughter drifting through open windows. The ranch hummed with life and purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Taking me in that day? Everything that came after?" Caleb pulled her close, his arms still as strong and sure as they'd been when she was at her lowest. "Never. You gave me back my life, Sarah. Reminded me what it means to live instead of just exist. We saved each other." "We did." He kissed her temple. "And we're still doing it. Every day we choose each other and choose to make the world a little less hard for women who need help. That's not a burden. It's a privilege." Sarah leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. The sunset painted the valley in shades of gold and amber, and the wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. She thought about the terrified young widow who'd walked into Hartley's store with nothing but a gold ring and desperation, and barely recognized that woman now. She'd become someone who helped instead of just survived, someone who turned pain into purpose, someone who'd learned that love wasn't about ownership or obligation, but about partnership and choice. "Together," she whispered. "Always together," Caleb agreed. And as the sun sank below the horizon and stars began their ancient dance across the Wyoming sky, Sarah Tucker knew with absolute certainty that she'd finally found what she'd been seeking all along: home, purpose, and a love that grew stronger with every passing year. The work continued. Emily's house expanded to 12 locations. Sarah wrote 2 more manuals on helping women recover from trauma. Caleb's ranch became a training ground for dozens of women learning to support themselves. And through it all, their love remained the foundation, tested by time and hardship, but never wavering. Because some loves are forged in fire and hardship. Some loves are built on mutual respect and shared purpose. And some loves prove that the heart, once broken, can heal stronger than before if you're brave enough to trust again, to choose vulnerability, to believe that together is better than alone. Sarah and Caleb had been. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Sarah and Caleb's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.